Hey everyone, my name is Carlos. I'm a web developer based in Brooklyn, New York. And today we're going to test our Bootstrap knowledge and work on a project called Adhoc. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so for this project, we're going to be working on a website called Adhoc, and we're going to be using our Bootstrap knowledge and all the documentation provided to create a website for an office administration site. So we're provided with a design spec sheet here. I suggest you guys keep that open. I have that open over here on a different tab. Let me just zoom out a little bit more. You'll see that we have spec sheets for how it should look like as a desktop in full width. And we have a smaller sized version here on the side for the mobile site. You'll see there's slight differences, but you'll notice certain keywords here that indicate we're going to be using specific utility classes provided by Bootstrap. For example, we have display 4 here, specific kinds of different displays and headers, and we have a carousel here as well that we're going to be using and implementing later. So keep this out and handy for you to keep looking back and forth while you're actually coding the site. So let's go back to our instructions here. We're going to be provided with a bunch of images. If you'd like, you can go ahead and open them already and save them in some sort of folder so you have easy and fast access to them. You can also just click on them and save the image URLs as you go. And also keep a browser open with the Bootstrap documentation. You're going to be reading that as you go through the website as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with step number 1. We're actually just going to be looking at our index.html, and you'll see there's already some boilerplate code here. We see that we have we have our CDN for Bootstrap, which you can see is version 4.2.1 right over here. We have separate comments. I'm actually going to expand this a little bit. We have comments that help us see how the website is broken down. So we have our navbar here at the top. Below that, we have our Jumbotron, our container with some quotes. Then we have some images for the team, and then a carousel that has the actual images, and then a footer at the bottom here. Okay, let's open up the instructions. I'm going to keep this maximized for as we go along. And we're going to be removing and changing some of the code here because a lot of it is actually copy-pasted from a Bootstrap example. Okay, so let's move on to step number 2. Let me uncheck this step. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to tackle the navbar. And like you noticed, like I said before, the actual boilerplate for the navbar was copy-pasted from the example before. So there's a lot of stuff we don't need. Let me open this up so you guys can see. So we have a drop-down menu here that's disabled link and a disabled link over here, and then a link here, and then we have a search bar here that we don't really need. So we're going to be removing those parts of the navbar. Also wanted to point out, to make your life easier, when you click on an element, the closing tag will be highlighted here. So you'll see the list element here highlighted with its closing tag, same with the anchor tag and every other tag. So the 3 elements that we're going to be removing is the drop-down option, the disabled link, and the search bar. So let's start with the drop-down menu. You can see the drop-down menu is right over here. So it's essentially this list item here. So let's remove that. We also don't need the disabled link, so let's remove that. And let's also remove the search form here. Make sure you don't remove the unordered list tag because that's part of the navbar itself. Let's go ahead and save that and make sure that it's actually removed from the site. So let's open this up. I'll expand this as well, and you see we removed the search form and the other disabled link in the drop-down menu. Okay, looking good so far. So let's go back here. I'll expand my editor, and let's move on to step 3. Now we're going to be adding the logo. So we're going to locate the element with the class navbar brand, which is here on my line 15. And we're going to replace the text inside that A tag with an actual image source. So instead of actually displaying navbar like it has here, we're just going to display the logo itself. So let's remove that. We'll add an image tag. Make sure that it's close, it's self-closing tag. And we'll add a source equal to the link provided there in the instructions. So let's grab this over here. Let's make sure to grab the quotes as well. There we go. And also remember, image tags always have an alt attribute to that. So I'm just going to type in logo as the attribute, so that will show up when we actually hover over the icon. And let's go ahead and open up, and you'll see our logo is displayed there appropriately. Okay, let's move on to step number 4. Now our design spec sheet indicates that we actually have 4 links. We have About Us, Our Team, Contact Us, and Home. So we're going to be adding more links to our nav bar here. I'm just going to grab this list item, which is one of the links, and we're going to just copy paste this 3 more times. Oh, we actually don't need this one. That would be a 5th one since we already have home. So home, about us, our team, and contact us. Now, one thing I'd like to point out before we move forward is that we can specify at what breakpoint we want the navigation bar to extend or collapse at using a utility class called navbar-expand and then specifying what screen size we want. So if we go back to our nav element here, you'll see that we have a class added to it that says navexpand-lg. So this is a responsive collapsing class. So if we want the navbar to expand at a large screen, we can specify the screen size right over here. If we want it to be medium, we can just type medium. We can type in small. We can type in XL. And I believe that's about it. So we're going to leave it for large, so it expands when we're in a large screen for now. So go ahead and save that. And let's open it up here. Let's expand it so we can see the links, and we have them here appropriately, similar to the design spec sheet. Okay, looking good so far. Let me expand this one more time. Okay, let's move on to step number 5. We're going to be working with the Jumbotron now. So under the navbar, there's a div tag that we're going to turn into a Jumbotron, which is right over here. It currently has some inline CSS with the style attribute. And we're going to actually add a class and a utility class provided by Bootstrap that's called the Jumbotron and Jumbotron Fluid. Now, to make the Jumbotron full width and without rounded border corners, that's why we use the Jumbotron Fluid modifier class. So let's go ahead and add our class, our attribute class style here, attribute class. This is straight from Bootstrap, so Jumbotron Fluid. There we go. And if we save that, it'll show up right there at the top. It looks a little thin compared to the design spec sheet. That's because we don't really have any content inside it yet. We'll be adding that in the next 2 steps. So let's move on to step number 6 now. I'll expand this once again. So inside our Jumbotron, we're going to add another div, which is going to act as our background and container for the text we want to insert. So you can see right over here, this div itself will contain the text that we're going to add to it. So let's go back again. So let's create a div right over here. Make sure it's closing as well. Inside that div, I'm going to make some spacing here. We're going to add an H1 header. Make sure you close it. And a paragraph as well. And let's take a look at what is the content we're going to write. Administration made easy is for the header. So administration made easy. And for the paragraph, we're going to write Adhoc is an on-demand administrative service for your company growth. So Adhoc is an on-demand administrative service for your company growth. For your company growth. Okay, let's see what it looks like now. There we go. We still need to actually style this a little bit, but we see this div made the Jumbotron expand a little bit more, and we have our text here right in the middle, which is looking good so far. Okay, I'll expand this, bring up the instructions. Okay, now we actually have to style the elements we just added. Okay, so we want to add three things to the content we just added. We're going to add it to the parent div of the text itself. So let's add these utility classes. You want to make sure it has a gray background. Now Bootstrap provides certain background colors that we can actually just give a class to, and it will like really make a nice color. So let's go ahead and add what's going to be called BG secondary. That will create a gray background. Then we want the text to be white, so we can simply add text white and text center, and that will center our text as well. So let's see what that looks like after we add those classes. And you can see it looks a little bold, but we'll correct that in a second. You can see it looks closer to what we have in the spec sheet. The actual header, it looks a little thinner, and the way we're going to do that is by adding a utility class called display4 to the actual header. So let's go ahead and in the header, let's add a class called display4. And one thing before I forget, we want a larger top and bottom margins by assigning the class of my5. M stands for margin, and y, you can think of y as a y-axis. So vertically, we're going to be adding margin to the top and the bottom of 5. So this is a predefined utility class that is provided by Bootstrap as well. Most of these classes are all from Bootstrap, if not all of them. So let's go ahead and add that to the actual div. Let's save that, and I'll expand once again our website so we can see it. And you can see now it's a little, the text doesn't look as bold as it did before, and it looks really nice and pretty much identical to the spec sheet. So we have a paragraph with center text. It's display 3 class, and it has the gray background. Okay, good so far. Let me expand the editor again, and we'll move to actually styling the quote now. So our quote section is right under the Jumbotron, and let's go ahead and look at the spec sheet again, which is this quote right here. So for the quote itself, we want to make sure that it's in italic and it has a light font weight. And for the actual author of the quote, we want his name to be right aligned, and we want that to also be italic, but also to have a bold font weight, whereas the actual title of the author of what he does or where he works should be an italic font and a light font weight. Okay, so for the H2 tag, which is the quote itself, similar to what we did with the text inside our Jumbotron, we want to make sure that the text is font weight is light and it's italic. So let's add font italic and font weight light. Save that. Now remember, the name itself is actually going to be bold, so we're going to add a font weight of bold, but we still want it to be italic as well. So let's make sure it's italic. And if we don't specify the type of font weight for the span, it will just automatically go to bold, since the parent class, the parent tag, is actually bold as well. So we have to actually specify we want this font weight to be normal. Font weight normal. Let's save that, and let's go ahead and see what it looks like. Hopefully I didn't make any spelling mistakes. Let's bring this out. And it looks pretty good so far. It looks good here. So we have the bold author name. We still have to make sure that it's aligned to the right, so I forgot to do that. Let me just make sure to add that here. All we need to do is add to this class text right, and that would align it to the right. By default, the quote itself will align to the left if we don't specify where we want it to align. Now we're going to finish up the quote styling by increasing the top and bottom margins of the column containing the quote, and we're going to do that by assigning a class of my5, which, like I've mentioned before, adds a vertical margin to the top and bottom, followed by a number. In this case, we're just going to add a 5. So let's go ahead and see lastly what it looks like, and you can see there's more spacing between the Jumbotron at the top and the quote itself, and there's some spacing here, some margin at the bottom as well. Okay, let's move on to step number 9. And now we're going to actually work with the cards. Now you can do a lot with cards. The cards with Bootstrap are actually built with Flexbox, so they offer easy alignment, and you can mix well with other Bootstrap components. Now they don't have an actual margin by default, so we're going to have to use some spacing utility classes as we need them. But okay, let's go ahead and find the H2 element with the text that says Y Adhoc, which is right over here. And we're going to center the text and give it a display heading that follows the design spec. So let's go and see what display heading it requires. It requires a display 4 class and a text in the center text. So let's add a class here. We'll say we want the text to be center, and we also want the display 4 class added to it. Save that again. Open up here, and we see that we have a display 4 header. It looks pretty nice. Okay, let's go on here. Let's move on to step number 10. Okay, in step number 10, we're going to continue and add the following design spec to the next row, and we're going to be adding cards in each column. So let's look once more at the design spec. These are essentially the cards we're going to be adding. So you can see there are 3 cards over here, and each card will have, neither of them will have a border, and below the card there will be a center paragraph, essentially a card body with the text. There will be 3 of these. Okay, so let's go back. Now, I would suggest you guys open the documentation for cards to see how the actual content of cards are actually written. You'll see that inside a card class, a card div, inside there, we're gonna actually, in order to actually write content within it, we need to nest another div inside it with a class called card body. And inside that body, we can add our headers and paragraphs with a specific kind of text that we want. So we're going to be following the same kind of pattern that we have here listed in the documentation. So go back into our code. Scroll a little further down over here, and you can see there's comments that indicate where we're actually going to be adding our cards. So our cards will be within the column class here, the column div. So let's go ahead and get started by adding a div here. Make sure it's closing. This div will have a class called card. Now inside that actual card div, we need another div that has the actual card body. And in here, we're going to add the content for the actual card itself. So let me just correct this over here. Close the div. So inside this div with the card body, here's where we're going to be adding our text, our paragraph. Now, remember, we also have an image, so that will go within the card but on top of the card body. So I'm just going to add a placeholder for the image here. Make sure it's self-closing, and let's close off the paragraph here as well. Now I'm going to be filling these out, and I'm simply just going to copy paste this 2 more times here, so we don't have to type the same thing again. So I'm going to add the classes here that specify the specs that are indicated, and then copy and paste those specs, and then fill out the images for each card. So first thing we want is for the card to not have a border, so we can simply add that rendex to the card class. We'll indicate it to have a border of 0. We want the image icon on the top, so we can actually add that to the image tag itself. Let's add a class that says card image at the top. And remember, we want the text itself. It needs the actual class card text. So let me go back to the actual example here. We have our header, which has card title. That's unnecessary for our case, but we want our paragraph to have the class card text. So let's go back, we'll do card text, and we want the text to actually be centered. So let's go ahead and text a center. That's pretty much it for our case. I'm also just going to add an empty alt attribute because we're going to be filling that out as we add more image sources. I'm going to go ahead and copy this card, and I'm just going to paste it here for the second card, and we're going to fill out the blanks as we go on. So now we need the actual images. So I'm going to go ahead and open this image, and let's go ahead and grab the address itself, copy image address, back to our code, and let's add a source here where we actually add the address itself. And I'm going to go and save this and just see how it looks before we actually start adding the rest of the images. And you can see we have our icon right over there. Okay, that's looking good. Let's make sure we add our alt attribute and fill that in. So experience icon. And we're going to do the same for the other ones. So I don't have to open 20 links and waste too much time. I already have the links saved in the text file, so I'm just simply grabbing them and copy pasting them here. But you can simply just open up the URLs and just copy and paste the image address as well. So you got that one for fun. Oh, I believe I got these out of order, so let me just grab these one here. Paste that one here instead of it being the second one. I'll grab this one here instead of that one. And let's grab the last one, which is right over here. And this is the smart icon. So let's save that. So it's going to look a little bit different on the mobile and the desktop way. So if we open this up, you can see it kind of looks, it doesn't look perfectly on the mobile view. And if we expand this, it should look fine aligned into one whole row. But we're going to actually alter this so that it actually takes up one row itself, because it doesn't look like it's doing the right amount of spacing when we're actually expanding it or minimizing it. Okay, so for step 11, we're going to be working precisely on that. So while the column looks good on the large screen, the contents look squished on a smaller screen. So we're going to change the width of the column so that it has a width of 4 on medium and a larger size in screens. And then for extra small and small size screens, it should have a width of 8. So we're going to do that on the parent div of all the rows. Sorry, I mean cards. And this will be done right over here. So we want to default it to 8 for the smaller size screens. And for the medium ones and large ones, we actually want to specify MD and 4. If you're familiar with a grid system, you'll know that the way the columns work is Bootstrap by itself provides 12 columns to use depending on what screen size you're using. So Bootstrap provides us with 12 available columns, and if we're in medium-sized screens, we're going to be using 4 columns per each of these. So let's grab these for all of them. Let's paste that into each card here. Oh, we'll do that right here, and then right here as well. Let's save that. Let's open up our browser here and see how it looks, and you can see that we have our icons here, and they look different when they're expanded into the full-sized desktop size, and when we're in a mobile size, they're taking up their own rows. Looking good. It's a little space to the left. We're going to be correcting that as well. No worries. So, okay, let's move on forward to step number 12. Now we actually need to center the rows. Let's also have the rows center the columns containing the cards. Since the grid uses Flexbox, we can actually use similar classes that Flexbox uses. So we want to justify center all the content within the div of the parent of these cards. So let's go ahead right over here where we have a row, and everything within that row should be centered. So we're going to go ahead and call justify. We're going to add this class called justify content center. Let's save that, and it shouldn't be aligned to the left anymore. So let's open them up, and you can see now it's actually centered as it should be. Okay, perfect. Okay, for step 13, we're going to increase the vertical margins of the row within the text Y Adhoc and the row containing the cards to space out the rows. So for our Y Adhoc text, for a header here, we can simply add vertical margin of 5. And we should also add some margin bottom to the cards here at the right on the row. Now I'm just going to add in the bottom because we have margin already at the top and bottom for this quote. So let's look at the spec one more time. If we add margin here at the top and at the bottom of Y Adhoc, we don't want to add more margin at the top because then that will mean the margin will go into 5, whatever margin top we do. So let's just specify we want bottom margin for these cards so they space out from the bottom below. So all these cards will have a specific amount of space and they're not squished together. So let's go back here. And right next to our justify content center, we have a utility class called MB, which stands for margin bottom, and we can simply add 5. So that will add a little bit of more spacing for our cards themselves. And let's not forget to add the content itself. We can look at the design spec where there's actually specific kind of content, which has a center paragraph. So let's go back here. I'm expanding this one more time. And I'm going to be adding the text. Like I said, I already have some of the text in a text file separated, so I'm simply just going to add it here and copy paste it in there. We want to make sure it's already text at center, and we already added the classes necessary for it to be colored white, so that shouldn't be an issue. So I'm simply just going to fill out the content that's displayed from the spec over here. So the last one should be right over here, and then we can see how it looks like with the content. So let's open up. Here we go. And here we go. We have the icons with the text, and we can see there's a little bit of spacing, so it looks really nice and quite similar to the mobile desktop specs here. We see that we have our centered columns here. And let's go and see what it looks like when we expand to a full desktop view. It looks pretty good. Okay, let's move on to the next step. So for step 14, let me check this off. For step 14, we're going to locate the row with the text meet the team, which is right around here, around line 100. And we're going to look at the design specs and provide that row with the utility classes that render a dark background with a rounded top border. So let's go ahead to the specs here. And this is the actual part we're working with. So we're going to see this div has an actual dark background, and it has a rounded border here at the top. So a rounded top of the border. So let's go back here. All we need to do, a utility class for the background color is already provided by Bootstrap, so we can specify it by BG dark, and we can simply add a rounded top with a utility class called rounded top. So pretty self-explanatory, pretty good. Right now it's going to look quite thin. Let's go and see. Yeah, it looks pretty small since there's no content inside it, which is totally fine for now. Okay, for step 15. Our H2 header within that div should have specific classes as well. We want to make sure that its text is white, that it's centered, and that it's a display header. So let's go ahead and add those classes right now. So we want to make sure it's text white, its text is centered, and it's a display. And let's go ahead and take a look at the specs. Display 4 class. Okay, display 4. And I'm actually going to remove this image here. We don't really need that anymore. So let's save that, see what it looks like, and it looks pretty good. Okay, nice. Let's move on to step 16. Okay, for step 16, we're going to style the row below the text meet the team. We're going to give the bottom row a dark background and a rounded bottom border. So we're next to the class. Let's go ahead and add a dark background here. And let's specify the rounded bottom border. Okay, let's save that as well. Let's move on to step 17, where we're going to actually start working with the carousel controls. So if you look at the carousel, there seems to be some boilerplate code already that was taken actually from the controls example. So let's go ahead and take a look at the actual example itself and see how it was written. You can see there's some arrows over here that you can basically slide images with. And the carousel is constructed using some utility classes that Bootstrap provides. There's a few of them. Carousel item would be essentially one of these pictures, one of these images, and it can be specified what kind of width, what kind of size you want for each image. So if you want it to be maybe half of this whole div, you can specify with W-50 or W25 if you want it to be a quarter. It's very useful and very easy to implement, and it makes it really look really nice. So it's a really great tool that Bootstrap allows us to manipulate and control. So let's go back to our code, and we're going to start manipulating and changing some of the stuff in here in the boilerplate. So similar to what we did with icons, we're going to open all of these images and save the image URLs. In order to save some time, like I did with the icons, I actually already have some of the image sources. So I'm simply just going to replace the dots here with images that I have already. Let me remove that, and we're going to add the alt should be the name of the team member. So I'm going to just type in Brian. I'm going to add the same for the second image, which should be Andy. Then we have Angela. And lastly, we have Amy. So let's save that. These images are found within the carousel item. So let's look back at the example. Each one of these is a carousel item. So we're essentially specifying what image we wanted to show. So now that we actually have changed the boilerplate, let's go and see what it looks like. And you can see right over here that we have the images already being displayed for us. And we can control how we're going to switch between back and forth. Let's see what it looks like at full desktop view. You can see it's actually quite big. We're going to be changing the size of these images, but right now we want to make sure it just functions. Okay, looking good. Let's move on to step 18. Okay, with the slide set up, we can add some captions to each slide. So style the caption so that it has a black background, no vertical padding, and a rounded pill border. Let's go back to the specs and see what the caption looks like here. So each image will have a specific caption. It will have basically the title of the team member, and that will be in bold. And it will have the name of the team member, which will be a light font weight. We also want the caption itself to have a dark background and a pill-shaped border, and we want the text to actually be centered. So we're going to be doing that on the following. So how do we add captions? Well, let's go back to our example here. If we scroll a little bit further down, we can see that we have an example for captions here. So under the image tag, we're going to be adding a div that essentially has a class called carousel caption. And inside that div, we're going to be adding our paragraph that has a name, the title name, and the name of the team member itself. Let's go back to our code. We're going to be adding this right below our image tag. So let's make a div here. Let's close it up. So this div will have the class of carousel caption. So let's add the class right now. Carousel caption. I think that's how you spell carousel. Yeah, carousel caption. And that div will contain our actual content, which will be the title name and the name of the team member. Now for the carousel caption, we know we want it to have a dark background, and we wanted to have a rounded pill border. So we can actually use a utility class provided by Bootstrap. Once again, that's called rounded pill. So once again, let's go back to our specs here. We see we want the text to be centered. We want the dark background with a pill-shaped border, which we've got. And here we're going to work on the text following that. So let's go back. So we're working with Brian here. So let's make sure our paragraph here has a font weight bold. Let's also make sure that it's centered. So let's go ahead here, text center. Now I can type in CEO and Brian here, but then that will mean the whole content here is it's in bold text. So in order to make this specific word here, the title name, into a normal kind of font weight, we should wrap that out in a span tag. So it's an inline text that can be surrounded by a paragraph, and we can style that span however we'd like. Since we want the name of the team member to be actually normal font weight, we can simply add a class here that specifies the font weight for the name to be normal. Or is it light? Oh, it's actually light font weight. So let's change this back to light. And since we're going to be copy pasting this div over here, I'm going to add this right below each image tag for each member. And then we'll be changing the name and the titles. So right under Angela and right below the Amy image, we're going to be adding these images here. All we need to change is the title name and the name for each these carousel items. Oh, and before I forget, we also want no vertical padding. So we can, I'm going to select all the text here. I'm using a MacBook, and if you press Command and click on different lines of your text editor, you can actually put in multiple cursors here. So to save some time, I'm just going to specify the class name that allows us to have no vertical padding. So the same way we have the same kind of the same way we've been writing margins with a letter M and then the axis we're working on and then a number, we can do the same with padding and pretty much most of the margins and types of paddings we want. So margin bottom is MB, padding top is PT. So for the vertical padding, we can specify the padding for the y-axis should be equal to 0. And that way we'll avoid having any padding for each of these. So I'm going to scroll back up here, and we're going to change now the titles for each of these team members here. So we got Andy, who is the CFO. We'll change Brian to Andy here. We got Angela, who is the COO. Let's change that to Angela. Angela. And lastly, we have Amy, who is the CTO. Let's change Brian to Amy. Let's save that. Let's open it up and see how it looks. Okay, we see that there's some spacing here. We already set the padding for 0 vertically, but for the paragraph itself, it seems to have some margin at the bottom. So what we're going to do is actually set the margin at the bottom for each of these paragraphs to 0. So all we need to do, let's go back up here. I'm going to do the same thing I did where I pressed Command and clicked on different lines to put in different cursors. And we're going to add a margin bottom of 0. Save that again. Let's open up tag here and let's see how it looks like now, and it looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and see how it looks on different images. Let's make sure we go back. I seem to have forgotten colon on Amy here, so let's add that over here. There we go. Let's save that again. Okay, looks pretty good. I'll expand it to see how it looks like in full size view. Yeah, the images are pretty big. We're going to work on that in the next step, but it's looking good so far. Okay, let's move on. I'm making too many clicks here. Okay, now we're going to change the sizing of the carousel to only take up 50% of the width and set the margin to automatically center its content. So let's look one more time into the example of our carousel here with the caption, no, with the controls here. We can actually set the width of the items here with a specific utility class called W, and the sizing. The number will be representing a percentage of the width of the actual div we're going to be working with. So if we wanted to take 50%, all we need to do is specify W-50. And in order to apply that width for all the carousel items, you can simply add that into the div that has the ID of carousel example controls. So we're going to add that class over here, W-50, and that would just basically set it 50, the width of 50, but it's still going to be aligned to the left. So we want to make sure that it's centered within that div. In order to do that, we can simply set the margin all around to auto. So anytime it's resized, it's going to be moved to the center of that div again. So if we now go into our actual site here, you see that it resized to the actual image here. So let's go ahead and expand that as well to the desktop size. And you see that it's a lot smaller. It takes 50% of this whole div container. And with mx-auto, we're able to actually center it inside that div. Okay, cool. So let's move forward, guys. We're almost done here. Oh, and before I forget, let me look again at the image here. It seems like we're missing a little bit of padding right below the actual meet the team carousel. So we're going to add some padding bottom over here. We're going to add that to the actual carousel div. So the top here, padding bottom, I'm going to add a padding bottom of 5. Let's open this one more time. See what it looks like, and we have some padding bottom here at the bottom here. And one other thing I seem to have missed is if we look at the spec sheet, there seems to be some margin at the top and the bottom of the Meet the Team title. So let's go back to our code here. I'm going to expand my editor. And on the Meet the Team section, should be right above our carousel here. Let's go right here, Meet the Team. We're actually just going to add some margin vertically. And we're going to add it straight into our actual text here. So margin vertically of 5. That should give us a little bit more spacing. So it should look more similar to the actual spec that we have here. So that looks a lot better now. If we look back here, yeah, that looks pretty good. And it should look pretty much the same when we minimize it to its actual mobile size. So let's see. Scroll to the bottom here. We have some spacing there. Okay, looking good so far. We're almost done, guys. So let's go back into finishing up into step 20. So for step 20, we're simply going to center the text in the footer. So let's go all the way to the bottom and add a class here that just says text center and save that. Okay, let's open up our actual site here. Let's expand it, see how it looks. And we have our text center at the footer here. And that's pretty much it, guys. We have completed a basic website. And all was this done simply using utility classes with Bootstrap. We don't even have JavaScript inserted here. Well, it comes as part of the CDN with Bootstrap. But you can see how versatile Bootstrap can be. We can manipulate our carousel. We can add some different controls in many ways we want. There's some predefined colors that Bootstrap provides for us. And one feature that I personally really like is the way that margin works with Bootstrap. All we need to do is simply add a class. We don't even need a style sheet to actually specify the margin. And with its ability to use Flexbox, it makes it really responsive and really easy to use. Now, if you guys want to mess around with this a little bit more, feel free to do so. There's some few other options you can actually do and challenge yourself. One of the best ways to learn is to put yourself out of your comfort zone. So go ahead and give yourself a challenge by taking a dive and completing these other steps here. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.